If you want to understand the anxieties of America today, don't look at economic charts. Look at how people live and fade away on the sidewalks of Los Angeles. In a place that should represent growth, innovation, and opportunity, America reveals its most difficult to hide social underbelly. Skid Row. No wider than a few dozen blocks, but enough to shake any claims of sustainable prosperity. Skid Row reveals a paradox. The distance between a $4,000 apartment and a mattress on a concrete floor is now measured in just a few meters. In a city with a GDP larger than many countries, thousands still have to live in tents, have unsafe living conditions, and exist in a state that experts call prolonged depletion. Insecurity doesn't lie in the number of people sleeping on the streets, but in the fact that they come from all walks of life. People who once had stable jobs, those who lost their homes due to rent prices, those who suffered mental breakdowns after the pandemic, and the elderly who can no longer afford the cost of living. They are not fallen individuals. They are an indication that the socio-economic structure is out of sync. In today's documentary, we'll delve into this ghost city to understand why a wealthy country allows thousands of people to live on the margins. Is Skid Row on its way to becoming the future for all of America? Let's find out right now. Los Angeles has long been considered an economic symbol of the United States. A city with a leading GDP, real estate among the most expensive in the country, and a multitude of office towers worth hundreds of millions of dollars. However, just a few minutes outside the financial district, you'll see Skid Row emerge as a stark contrast. A place where over 4,400 people are crammed into an area less than half a square mile, a density that surpasses the average population of Washington, D.C., and where no one has a home. At the edge of the neighborhood, a Bentley can park right next to rows of dilapidated tents. Behind are apartments for rent at $3,000, $4,000 a month, but just a few meters away, the scene shifts directly from luxury to despair, as if the city operates on two unrelated levels of reality. From the 1970s to the 1980s, Los Angeles actively drew boundaries and turned Skid Row into a concentration camp for the poor. The goal is to bring together social services, hospitals, shelters, support centers, into a single area. This concentration is what caused the poor and homeless population to flock here in increasing numbers over time. If Los Angeles is the stage for prosperity, then Skid Row is like a dumping ground where social problems are pushed down and accumulate over the years. It functions like the city's deep well, where everything forgotten falls. A burial ground for the hidden corners that LA's glitz deliberately obscures. Survival conditions are minimal. A few public toilets for thousands of people, sleeping directly on the concrete floor, and meals entirely dependent on free handouts. Even more terrifying, many residents here are facing diseases that were considered eradicated a century ago, such as typhoid or hepatitis A. As if over 4,000 people were thrown into a time machine and sent back to the Great Depression of 1929. All those factors didn't happen by chance. They are the result of zoning policies, a severe lack of affordable housing, uncontrolled rent inflation, the rising cost of living constantly pushing workers out of their homes, untreated mental health crises, and a support system fragmented into small pieces. When multiple layers of problems converge in an area that is too crowded, Skid Row becomes a low-lying area from which only a few people can climb high enough to escape. As a result, the gap between those with homes and those without is compressed into an area of a few blocks, like life compressed into a coffin. A dangerous social distance, like trying to drive a new sports car with loose front wheels. The city could keep running, but the accident was only a matter of time. Looking at Skid Row is like seeing the darkest future version of Los Angeles, if current issues continue to be ignored. Therefore, Skid Row is no longer a neighborhood. It's a moral test for Los Angeles. Of course, Los Angeles is not ignoring the lingering problems here. However, the more effort and funding poured into it, the more severe the homelessness crisis in Skid Row becomes. So, Are money, resources and policies being used for the right purpose? And if that much money wasn't poured entirely into the crisis, where is that enormous sum going? The answer will be revealed in the next part. Once Skid Row has become a mirror that exposes hidden corners that Los Angeles cannot hide, the next natural question no longer lies in the image of the dress, tent, or cold concrete, but in something invisible but more decisive: cash flow. Because the paradox is that while thousands of people sleep on the street, the city spends billions of dollars every year on that very problem. So, why does Skid Row persist and worsen over time like a system bug that no one can fix? Los Angeles spends about $2.3 billion a year on anti-homelessness programs, a figure that's enough to rebuild an entire small town. However, most of this spending falls into the blur, dispersed through many funds, many agencies, and cannot be clearly traced. The issue of lack of transparency is so serious that a federal judge once considered taking homeless budget management away from the city, saying the oversight system was too weak. Meanwhile, a project of only 39 tiny homes, each about 64 square feet wide, cost $5.4 million. When dividing the average, the spending level makes many residents feel like they are witnessing an irrational economic problem that no one is explaining. Especially when the city itself once committed to building 10,000 cheap housing units. But after many years, only about 700 units were completed, a difference between promise and reality large enough to make people lose trust. In the commercial and restaurant areas around Skid Row, many business owners said they still face poor street conditions, apprehensive customers, and a less safe environment, despite the city repeatedly announcing that it has invested heavily. The separation between reporting and real life makes residents feel excluded from the master plan, as if the budget only rotates on paper without reaching the sidewalk where they exist. Even in the homeless community, many people say they don't believe that the number of people on the street is decreasing, because every week there are new people. When beautiful numbers only appear on reports and the number of real people on the streets increases, skepticism becomes a natural reaction. So is there a point in the operating structure that has bulging excessively, causing cash flow to not go where it needs to? The additional budget pouring, but the results are constant, suggests the possibility that the problem is not lack of money, but rather the budget's fragmentation, inefficiency, and lack of accountability. In that context, people look at huge expenses but small impacts and wonder, why can't a system that spends so much money provide a basic way out for the homeless? And when the financial story is so confusing that it is difficult to identify, what is most clearly revealed is the humanitarian assistance line, which must play the role of lifesaver, but operates sporadically and intermittently. When massive budget allocations still haven't brought about noticeable change in Skid Row, the next hope should have come from the frontline relief system, where people turn every day for a meal, temporary shelter, or simply the feeling of being cared for. However, even this humanitarian machine is operating in a way that makes many people feel it's only enough for immediate relief, rather than bringing them any closer to a way out. As early as 6:30 a.m., people were already lining up in front of Midnight Mission to wait for a meal. Demand always far exceeds capacity, creating the feeling of a system operating at full capacity but still falling short. For those who have just lost their homes, they are told they must wait 3 to 6 months in a shelter before they can hope to be granted stable housing, a period so long that many people are exhausted before they can even get back on their feet. Many people avoid going into shelters because the environment is too crowded with unpredictable or unsafe behaviors. This shows that the temporary housing model has gaps. What should be a safe stepping stone has become a space full of uncertainty, causing a portion of the homeless to choose to continue living on the streets. Charities distribute hundreds of hygiene kits, food and supplies daily, but most don't follow up with recipients afterward. Each group supports a little bit. Everyone does their part, making the whole system like a patchwork quilt. lacking the connection to create sustainable change. There has even been controversy over near-expiry food, highlighting a worrying gap between goodwill and process. By late afternoon, when most organisations had left, Skid Row was once again left to fend for itself during the night hours, which are considered the most stressful. At this time, the residents here entered a survival economy, picking up cans, selling old items, and cleaning up trash to earn a few dollars a day. These jobs didn't offer stability, but they were enough to get them through the day, like keeping an old machine running on its last bit of energy. When the support system is only piecemeal, can a network pieced together from hundreds of small fragments lead anyone off the streets? If the goal is to bring them closer to a different life, then why are most of them still stuck? When the relief system only helps people survive day by day, but isn't enough to get them off the streets, the next question must go back to the very beginning. Why can't they have a home? And it was right here that the crisis in Los Angeles revealed a nature deeper than what was happening on the sidewalks of Skid Row. The housing market in Los Angeles has reached a point where even the once stable middle class can no longer withstand the pressure. Rental prices in the blocks adjacent to Skid Row currently range from $3,000 to $4,000 per month for a small apartment, creating an insurmountable gap between the minimum cost of living and actual affordability. When basic expenses exceed income, a small setback such as job loss after the pandemic, mental breakdown, or a sudden increase in living costs is enough to push someone off the safety net and straight into homelessness. This is not a sudden event. It is a silent chain of breakdowns that has been going on for many years. Meanwhile, shelters, which are considered temporary recovery points, expose another layer of inadequacy. The cramped space, poor hygiene, constant noise, and unpredictable behaviour make this environment unsafe, especially for children. For many, shelter is not the starting point of recovery, but rather a place that prolongs feelings of instability, making the journey back to normal life even more fragile. More remarkably, the biggest paradox lies right within the urban structure. While tents sprout densely on the sidewalks, many shopping centres, from large malls to mid-sized shopping areas, are empty, standing still like forgotten concrete blocks. The city isn't short on space. The problem is that this space isn't being converted into solutions for those who need shelter more than ever. The gap between resources and accessibility turns the housing crisis into a structural problem, not a lack of resources. Looking at the overall picture, it's clear that this crisis is not just about rental prices. It's the mismatch between the city's development rate and its ability to protect the most vulnerable residents. The concentration of homeless people in an area like Skid Row is therefore not a spontaneous phenomenon. It reflects a structure that has operated in the same way for decades and continues to produce the same results. When a roof, something that should be a basic necessity, becomes a privilege, where is the current development model leading the city? And if vast empty spaces cannot be converted, is the problem a lack of resources or a lack of determination? From these misaligned foundations, a familiar Los Angeles story gradually emerges. The homeless are not only pushed to the margins of society, but also confined to a single area, as if the city has chosen a place to place its entire burden. From the shortcomings of the housing market, a natural question arises. If the homeless cannot live scattered throughout the city, why are they concentrated in Skid Row? The solution lies in a seemingly technical decision, but one that has actually shaped the entire destiny of this region for over half a century: the containment policy from the 1970s. At that time, Los Angeles designated Skid Row as a reception zone for all support services, from temporary housing, restrooms and park benches, to treatment centres, hospitals and charitable organisations. The goal is to keep the homeless within the support zone rather than letting them scatter across the city. In other words, Skid Row was designed as a literal point of attraction. The more services concentrated there, the more it became a magnet drawing in more people. And that's exactly what happened. Many residents said they were taken straight to Skid Row after leaving the hospital, or became part of the stream of people transported there by long-distance buses. At one point, 7 consecutive buses from other states brought new arrivals in just a few days, causing the area to become overloaded almost instantly. This concentration also creates a kind of forced internationalization. Each block has characteristics like a different country, with people from Venezuela, Guatemala, Mexico, El Salvador, all crammed into the same urban boundaries they didn't choose. And as more people poured in, the campsites expanded accordingly, putting pressure on services, the environment, and control capabilities. Skid Row grew not because it naturally sprouted, but because of guiding policy structures. From this, a dangerous cycle is formed. Focused support attracts more people, support becomes overloaded, more focus is needed, and the cycle continues without end. Skid Row didn't develop for random reasons. It's a direct product of a policy model that many cities saw as a quick solution, but which was essentially a way to create a system bottleneck. Can an area designed as a containment zone truly become a place for thousands of people to rebuild their lives? And if other cities adopt a similar model, what will happen in the next decade when containment zones multiply instead of disappear? When policies are based on zoning and support systems are fragmented, the inevitable next step is a decline in public trust in the entire management apparatus. When a city operates on zoning policies and makeshift support systems, the next thing that happens is not just an overload of tents or services, but a gradual erosion of trust, which is the foundation of any community. In Skid Row, this rift is more evident in the accounts of those who once lived ordinary lives like everyone else. A man who had maintained a stable life for 15 years said that just one small slip caused him to fall to the bottom. His story is not an exception, but rather a testament to the fragile line between stability and collapse in a city where the cost of living is so high that any event, illness, job loss, divorce, can knock a person off the safety net. Another woman, whose parents were both doctors, ended up homeless after her family broke up. The personal support network, which was a miniature version of the social contract, disappeared overnight. When that last buoy is gone, the larger social system also becomes alien. In that context, many Skid Row residents say they don't believe reports of a decrease in the homeless population. What they see every day is more newcomers, not fewer. These experiences made the numbers in the report seem out of sync with the reality before them. There are young people who admit they are afraid to return to normal life. When the gap between being in the community and being on the margins of the community becomes too large, that fear is not just personal psychology, but a sign of a breakdown in systemic trust. Some people say they have burned all bridges with their families, and when the last bridge disappears, the sense of belonging to society is also swept away. All of this shows that the cracks don't happen noisily. They occur silently, like a small joint gradually loosening in a large machine, until the entire structure no longer operates as smoothly as before. How can a system function when trust, the most fundamental element, is gone? And if this fracture continues to spread, where will be the final breaking point for a city that considers itself a center of prosperity? With trust eroded, the future of Los Angeles becomes more concerning than ever. And it is this that leads the story to its conclusion. Is Skid Row merely a local phenomenon, or a harbinger of what America could become? As you reach the end of the journey in Skid Row, what haunts you isn't the numbers, but the difference between being here for 12 hours and not being able to leave. That precariousness clearly exposes the boundary between the observer and the one trapped within the system, like a seemingly invisible distance that divides both worlds. A resident asked, "If humans can go to the moon, why can't they clean up these streets?" This is not an extreme lament, but rather the way someone at the bottom of society questions the capabilities of a nation that once led every scientific race. As grand goals continue to be pursued, basic issues within the city limits of a wealthy city are still being left behind. Those who have been provided with temporary housing express gratitude, but also concern. The new accommodation lacks mental health support services, intervention staff, and so many things that it can't be called a fresh start. They entered a safer space, but still lived among deeply wounded people, in a system that lacked long-term recovery direction. Housing is the first step. Healing is the real goal, and the gap between the two is still too wide. Looking out over the entire city of Los Angeles, the image of tents nestled next to luxury buildings creates a boundary so clear it's undeniable. This is not a sign of the apocalypse, but rather evidence of a system operating out of sync. When School on Wheels had to set up classrooms right in Skid Row so children could access education, it was both a small glimmer of hope and a reminder that a new generation was growing up in conditions completely unsuitable for nurturing the future. Many residents here affirm, spirit is the core issue. Housing is just the tip of the iceberg. This assessment suggests that the entire crisis doesn't stem from a lack of effort, but from the fact that parts of the system, policy, support, housing, mental health, community, are not operating in sync. And as the lack of synchronization spreads, unrest like Skid Row could easily recur in any American city. What makes Skid Row a cautionary tale is that it is not a product of chaos, but of structure. A long-standing operational structure, accumulating problems layer by layer until it forms a neighborhood that no one can explain with a single cause. If a wealthy city can still have such large blind spots, are smaller blind spots forming silently elsewhere that we are not noticing? And is there still enough time to fix things before these instabilities multiply on a larger scale? If this story reminds you of something you've witnessed where you live, please share it below. Sometimes a single account can open up new perspectives for the entire community. Skid Row is not the end of the world, nor is it an exception. It is the result of decades of asynchronous development, misaligned policies, and a growing gap between human survival and the pace of a modern city. What's concerning isn't the existence of Skid Row, but the possibility that it could become a microcosm of the instability any American city could face if it doesn't start making repairs today. Skid Row reminds us that society doesn't collapse in a day. It crumbled piece by piece. A housing system that couldn't keep up with the cost of living, a disjointed support network, a domino effect zoning policy, and finally, the erosion of trust, the invisible glue that held the community together. If a wealthy city like Los Angeles can still create a large, dark spot like Skid Row, how many smaller dark spots are there where we live? And do we have the courage to look at those dark places before they become a second Skid Row? If this story resonates with something you've seen, experienced, or makes you reflect on where you are living, you can like it, so the algorithm knows that social topics like this are still valuable. Share to give one more person the opportunity to see the picture that many cities often avoid. Subscribe if you want to join us on our next journeys of discovery, where every story is a piece of the contemporary American mosaic. Your support helps stories like this continue to be told, honestly and without embellishment. The content in this video is based on real-world observations, resident accounts, public data, and information gathered from news reports, field reports, and documents. The goal of the video is not to criticize any individual or organization, but rather to analyze the broader social context and promote constructive discussion. Some opinions and stories are based on personal perspectives and may not reflect the entire system. Viewers are encouraged to learn more from official sources for a more comprehensive perspective.